obvious idea, right?
Uh-huh.
Where
Like we're missing something?
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, we're just the idiots. That's way too easy.
I don't think stability was really the issue, though, because, I mean, there's a lot of structures that were built back in those days that are still around, and so maybe stability was not that necessary.
Well, I think the stability ideas for more of the ones that were built as kind of ramparts or embankments, because there's one, I don't know the name of it, because there's so many of them, and they are impronounceable for me, because I cannot do that
the
Scottish Gaelic. Yeah, I can't do it. But it is a big hilltop that is nothing but vitrified stone for what looks like to be 50 or 100 feet of the top of that hill.
It's it's pretty. I know the one you're talking about.
Huge.
It's like about 100 by 200 yards.
But it makes sense why, if you were trying to keep that thing from washing out from underneath you, why I would think you would vitrify it. It would hold it in place.
Although, in the case of a lot of these, now correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't there generally a belief that there was an outer layer of larger cut stones that were stacked, on the outside of that, and that those have been removed to vitrify or not yet put in place to vitrify that stone?
That does not sound familiar to me.
Really?
Yeah,
Okay.
most everything I've read about is like, this is the wall and this is what it is, and we're not gonna then put a dress layer on top of it.
Yeah, so in that case, they were just using smaller rocks that weren't cut and shaped and everything to stack upon one another.
Right.
So I guess that would be kind of necessary for your stability.
Yeah.
Otherwise, your fort is just kind of like an oversized gravel pile.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
Yeah.
So let's go into the next layer of the theory of why this was done. And this section of why is that it was done for intentionally destroying the fort or the walls. And there's subsections to this, and it's going to make a little sense, but we're going to start with who would have done this in order to destroy the walls, and that is the original residents of said fort.
It's like, I'm sick of this look. Let's burn it. Yeah.
I have been asking you to redecorate for years, and you just won't do it.
I know.
No. The theory says that the residents were leaving the place that they lived, and instead of leaving this nicely made fortification for the next group to come along and just occupy without exerting any effort, they went ahead and decided that what they needed to do was burn that mother to the ground. And so they pulled parts of the walls down, threw this fuel in there, and then lit the whole thing on fire in an attempt to destroy it.
That's
That's an awful lot of work to do to destroy a place you lived at. Because think about it.
But it's also like 200 of them over the
Yeah.
That's like a lot of them.
It's maybe it was just a custom,
Well,
but the thing about it is that it would be easier just to dismantle it than to cart all the wood or coal or whatever up there.
Yes.
It would be. But the other thing about that occurred to me is if you think about the times and everything. I mean, maybe they did it for, say, superstitious reasons, like they'd been living there and they decided that for whatever reason the place was cursed or haunted.
Yeah.
And they decided that it had to be destroyed. It couldn't just be, we can't just move out. We've got to burn this spirit or whatever. Or it could be that maybe there was some sort of a plague thing going on, and they decided that disease, that kind of thing, so they decided to burn the thing to kill off disease.
I understand that. My issue with it is that it took so much time and effort to get the fuel there that usually when people were leaving the site that they had lived on, there was two reasons: war, meaning impending threat of war, and I got to get my stuff and get out of here, or famine. I got no food, so I'm weak and I need to go somewhere where I can eat. Neither of which I would think would encourage people to stick around
and do all that work
to light the walls on fire to destroy them. I mean, it's razing your home, and that's just so much work in either of those scenarios.
That's a good argument for building your house or your city out of wood, so it's a lot easier to just torch it when
your enemies think the same thing.
I know, they like it too. I know, but and that's kind of why I like my ghost castle idea a little better, or my ghost fort idea a little bit better.
Yeah.
Because even though that's loony, it's silly, but hey, you got a curse. You got to do what it takes to get rid of that curse.
Okay.
Right.
Well, yeah, I like the B part of this theory better.
Well, the B part of this theory is actually pretty robust and a lot of fun. This is where we're going to have the fun tonight. Not that we haven't been having any fun, I swear,
Yeah.
I promise. Section B of intentional destruction was that the destroyers were the conquerors. The people who conquered that place.
I mean, it makes more sense.
It does.
And actually, that was very common back in the old days. It's happened all throughout the world. They took
Razing your enemy's home. Yeah,
I mean,
you torch it.
Entire walled towns, entire cities were completely destroyed. Not just torched, but I mean, disassembled.
Well,
brick
yeah,
by
you're
brick,
sending a
stone by
message,
stone.
because what you're doing
Yeah.
is you're sending a message to everybody else. If you oppose me, this is your fate.
Yeah.
So go ahead, oppose me, and it's your fault.
Yeah.
You knew what was coming.
I still think it was a little wasteful. When I think about when you think about all around, all across Europe.
Or like Alexandria and places like that, where the torch.
All these places that were just completely destroyed by the invading army all throughout ancient Greece and everywhere else, they'd still be there, and they'd be decided to be more fun to take them apart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, go ahead.
I was just thinking, I almost wonder if, because I know we're going to talk, actually, why don't you talk about the thing you're about to talk about, and then I'll talk about the thing I'm going to talk about.
Okay,
Ooh, she's got
so
a thing.
she's given me my marching order, so I
All
must
right,
go in
you
that
better
order.
do it, dude.
So this part of the theory is, this is theory B subsection 1, is that it was all done by hand.
Yeah.
All of the destruction. Again, I see issues with soldiers who have just spent all this time and energy conquering somewhere, then turning around and having to scavenge the landscape for material to burn,
Oh, yeah,
to then
just have to
cart
go-
it all
Well, so
back.
here's what
You
I'll
gotta drag it up the
Torture the whole
hillside.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So here's my thing is what I don't know what there is to say that these walls, that the stones weren't actually the middle part.
Or actually, I thought they could have been the middle part, the filler between two larger walls that were stacked stone.
Yeah, well, so the reason I'm saying this is it could have even earthen walls with wood in the middle, right? And that it wasn't that the armies were like, all right, let's drag a bunch of wood up here to like set it on fire, but that they accidentally did either of the first methods on how by just saying, all right, like set the fire on the wood,
Torch the whole thing.
just torch the whole thing, and then walked away from it. And for whatever reason, by coincidence, that the wind was blowing perfectly and there was just amount, that the conditions were just right for it to vitrify the stone walls instead of just burn and then the stone crumbles and whatever.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like I almost
I
wonder if
do.
it was just like that, because again, like the 200 spread over this distance, it's not as though it's like every fort in a given space, right? So I almost wonder if there's some sort of addition to the, like Joe keeps thinking, right, that like that maybe that wasn't the entire wall, that there was some more components to the wall, and that we just don't. I mean, that's lost to history.
It's possible, and so it's because of the heat that it's taken. If this was done right, these fires could have literally been burning for days.
Yeah.
And in a time and era where you don't see lights at night, that is going to be very frightening to the villages and towns around you to see that this town is torched and it's still on fire 3 days later.
Yeah.
But at the same time, to where you're talking about, like maybe it had earthen structure and then wood, there's a couple
Or
of
even
them,
just wood.
Well, but I'm thinking is that there's a couple of them that it doesn't make sense because they're all different shapes and sizes. There's like the one that popped to my mind. I think it's called Mark's Moat, or the Moat of Mark. I can't remember which one it is, but the images I've seen, it's like a space, let's say the size of this building that we're in, but it's all flat. It's all in the ground. There's no raised wall, so it's almost like the ground was vitrified. So, I mean, that might lend credence to where you're going with it, but I don't know. I mean, it's super confusing.
Yeah.
Because
they're all kind of different.
Because we don't know how it was done. That's what's so confusing about
Lightning
it.
strikes.
Lightning.
Aliens.
Right.
Aliens.
Well, you know what? The thing about it is, too, is that maybe, if they were under siege, for example, which would probably happen before, your little fort falls and then they vitrify it for you. maybe, back in the old days of siege warfare, they didn't have siege machines or anything else or a huge army. They would just
trebuchets and stuff like that.
They would just wait them out.
Yeah, starve you out.
Yeah, they would do that, and it might have been that can be a long, tedious process sometimes, depending on whether the water supply is inside, how much food they got squirreled away. Maybe a more proactive way to do it is to go cut down the forest nearby, stack up all those trees and lumber all the way around the fort.
And just light it.
And you could basically asphyxiate probably everybody inside the place.
Yeah.
You probably could, and just your problem is done. And so you just hey, that's it. And of course you sort of do a little vitrification at the same time, but the purpose is really just to kill
side
everybody.
effect.
Yeah. I guess that's kind of my thought as well, is that it's there's nothing to say this was intentional.
Yeah.
Right.
Though again,
we're actually going to get into some intentional reasons.
Yeah.
So we
of
have
destruction.
In the destruction by the conquerors theory, there is some intentional ways that this possibly could have done. Let's actually. Those are the next bits that we have here.
This is my original theory.
Yes, I know. That's why I told you the whole
lot.
I love it. Okay. So this one is saying that the conquerors did this, but much like Joe said, they did it as a way to burn their enemies out, and they did it using Archimedes' death ray.
Yeah.
Which is really fun. And for those of you who have not heard of Archimedes' death ray, it's an invention that he came up with. It's called his death ray or his heat ray. Archimedes lived about 200 BCE, but he's described in the Siege of Syracuse as having destroyed the ships of the Romans using a device which was basically a series of giant mirrors that focused the sunlight and would catch those ships on fire. Then they would burn and sink. So the
Mythbusters did this.
Yes, they did.
How did it turn out?
Not so good.
It's actually one of my favorite screen caps of all time from Mythbusters. It's just got Adam Savage standing in kind of a bright light saying, "I'm standing right in the death." Oh no, it's not even Adam. It's Jamie.
Yeah.
One of them standing in the middle of a slightly bright spot and saying, "As you can see, I'm standing right in our death ray, and I'm not dead."
Yeah.
But according to the theory,
it's certainly possible.
They had this technology in northern Scotland at the time, and the enemies were directing the beams of their death ray on the walls of the fort and melting them.
It actually is a viable technology, but the array of mirrors you would have to have. Have you seen that? You've seen that solar collector in Southern California, right? The one that's got the big tower with the bulb.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that thing is, what is that thing, like a kilometer in diameter or something like that?
I have no idea.
Yeah, I mean, and you need a pretty huge array of mirrors to
for
actually
sure.
make that work. Yeah.
So
it's a great idea. I like it.
But I think it's pretty funky.
Fun. It is really fun.
Okay. We'll go on to the next tool that the enemies were using. That is Greek fire.
Yeah.
Which, if you don't know what Greek fire is,
well, we don't know either.
Nobody else knows, so good on ya. But Greek fire was most likely some form of crude petroleum.
I just want to point out the number of times you use the word crude in this.
I can't. It's a joke because it's crude oil.
Crude petroleum of some kind.
What would happen is, so the Romans used this, and they used it in naval battles because it scared the hell out of their enemies because it's petroleum, so it burns while it's on top of the water. And what they would do is they would
like napalm.
Yeah, so they'd spray it at their enemies, or they would throw it in these kind of rudimentary grenades,
like water balloons.
Like in vases or whatnot, and they would hit and it would splatter everywhere. And then somehow they would, shoot an arrow at it that was on fire. The old movie trope of shoot the burning arrow.
Yeah.
That's what they would do. So the theory goes that the invaders had Greek fire and they were throwing it at the wall, and that was the fuel that then created such intense heats that it vitrified the stone.
I mean, I guess.
Yeah, sure, why not?
I actually would say that if this were true, I would put this more on we did it intentionally in the building process, because it would be a hell of a lot easier to create the heat with this kind of fuel source than it would to be packing all that wood to the site.
Yeah, except for, the people who were building the forts might not have had Greek fire / petroleum.
Well, but if they had Greek fire, then it would be a hell of a lot easier.
Agreed, but isn't this theory that the attackers had Greek fire? Which
it
would
is,
have been
and I'm saying
that
I feel like it would make more sense if it had been the builders had the Greek, because if the technology of Greek fire existed, then you would think that most everybody would know. Most everybody. I understand
would,
that technology is not universally applied
Well,
or
I mean,
available.
I guess
but
not necessarily, because petroleum you have to actually like mine, right? It's not mined.
Well, there were places even in the ancient world, in the Middle East, where it was actually just coming
bubbling up at the top?
Bubbling up,
right, but in
yeah.
the Middle East, not in Scotland.
No,
right.
but
So
there was trade going on between the Middle East and Scotland.
But if we're
I mean,
saying
not
like the
that
Romans,
much,
who
but-
haven't you
controlled a lot
heard of
stuff.
the prehistoric North Scotland to Arabia pipeline?
Exactly. It's made out of bamboo, but yeah, it worked.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that the Romans had a lot of control in the Middle East in this time, right? Scotland didn't.
Correct.
So if we're saying, as the Romans are coming to invade Scotland, they could have easily had access to something that they didn't have in Scotland, which is petroleum, which, I think this is actually one of the better theories somehow.
Okay.
Honestly.
Well, it's good to know. You know what's a really crappy theory?
Nukes.
Yes.
I like
My last
that,
theory
exactly.
is that it was nuclear weapons. This is the greatest thing. Freaking internets. Somebody on the internet once went, hey, nuclear blasts are hot enough to melt stone. Wait, vitrified stones happen in the ancient world. The ancients had nuclear weapons!
Oh, yeah.
I think that's all the farther we need to take it, because
That would be,
so, I mean,
there would
unless
be a lot
this
of
is
evidence.
that Family Guy skit, which we've talked about before, I don't think this is it.
No, it's part of the problem is that we're talking the temperature is right at ground zero in a nuclear blast, or like 5 million degrees centigrade, or something ludicrous like that. So this would be way further out.
Yeah.
And there would be all kinds of vitrified stuff in a circle,
Along with giant craters.
in a radius and crater. There'd be a crater. I mean, the crater could have overgrown,
Yeah.
but there would have to be other vitrified. You'd find maybe a cliff or a rock face that had been similarly melted.
Yeah.
In the area, you find all kinds of stuff like that. I mean, there would be.
But you don't.
No,
You left out my favorite theory.
Oh, I did? What's that?
Yeah,
What?
which is according to ancient astronaut theorists.
Yeah.
Ancient alien technology could have been employed here. Is such a thing
Isn't
even
that what the-
possible?
isn't
Well,
that what the nuke
it
is?
No, not
Well,
necessarily.
what if they had a battle with some invading aliens and they got laser or something like that, or
Yeah.
phaser?
So this is
Phaser.
Scotsman versus aliens?
Yeah, yeah.
Is
And-
such a thing even possible?
Sure.
Yes.
Why not?
It is.
Is it irrefutable? No. Is it possible? Yes.
Actually,
is
it
it
is-
likely? No.
I think it is irrefutable, because can you come up with like a good way to refute that?
Drunk, yes.
Are you drunk?
No.
Dang it.
That's the problem.
All right.
All right. You guys got any other theories you want to run through this one?
Well, just
No.
a quick question. I'm not really sure how much archaeology they've done around these things. I mean, they keep calling them vitrified forts. Does anybody actually know if they're truly forts or not?
Well, some of a number of them, it is obvious that there was a settlement inside of them. Like the one I was talking about that looks like it's on the giant embankments. There's one where it is, oh gosh, what is it's two columns with an arch in the middle.
Oh yeah, no, I've
and
seen
it's
pictures of it. Yeah,
But that's all
I can't remember the name of it.
vitrified.
Yeah.
So that's very intentionally done,
Well,
and
but-
somebody lived in that.
The reason I'm asking is, maybe they were not built to be forts. Maybe they were built to be ceremonial sites. And maybe lighting a giant bonfire to the gods once a year or once in a lifetime or whatever. That's how they broke it in. It's like we got a ceremonial site. Now we got to pile all this wood or coal or whatever and have this huge fire. And because there's
Could have
actually
been bonfires.
yeah,
Yeah.
I mean
Or
there's-
even like funeral pyres.
yeah, it could have been that too, sacrifices. But I mean, there's places like if you look at Sacsayhuaman in Peru, which looks, if you look at it, it looks like just a huge freaking 3-tiered fortress. And I've got pictures of it. I'm sure you guys have seen pictures of it.
We have,
It's
yeah.
amazingly impressive, but it's not a fortress at all. It was not built to be a fortress. It was actually built just as a ceremonial site. And so, it's entirely possible that these things were built as ceremonial sites. And there was no invader, conqueror, or whatever. They just had a religious
Too
ceremony.
much time on their hands?
Yeah. What's that?
They had just too much time on their hands.
Well, people did make the time to do stuff. I mean, again, back to Peru and Sacsayhuaman. I mean, obviously that took a massive amount of effort to build that thing, and those people did it.
Yeah.
And so it could have been just once a year or once in a lifetime, whatever. We had this massive fire, and to appease the gods or something.
Yeah. I mean, I can't say that that's not right. I mean, it's entirely possible. Because, again, as I've said a bajillion times,
We don't
I have no idea.
No, nobody knows. We can all speculate. Or another possibility. I'm throwing this out for our archaeology, like anthropology major listeners.
Okay.
Another possibility is supposing they were ceremonial sites and the fires were not part of the ceremony, but there was like, it happens sometimes in human history. There was kind of a change of religion, and suddenly the old ones need to be like kind of scoured and done away with, and so maybe that's the reason that they were all flamed. Because otherwise, when you think about it, if you're the invader, it's less work to just dismantle it.